Today, we're going to dive into a group of conditions that are often sensationalized, definitely misunderstood. I'm talking about the cluster B personality disorders. You might have heard them described as the dramatic, erratic, and emotional cluster. But, what does that actually mean? Let's get into it.
Right? This question really gets to the heart of it. We've all known people who are larger than life, or who feel things incredibly deeply, or just seem unpredictable. But where's the line? When does a personality style cross over into something that's considered a clinical disorder? That's exactly what we're going to unpack here. So from a clinical perspective, there's this manual called the DSM. It's basically the guidebook for mental health professionals, and it groups these disorders together. Why? Well, it's because they all share this core feature of dramatic, emotional, or unpredictable ways of thinking and behaving. So it's not just some random label, it's a way of understanding a really consistent pattern of someone's inner world and how they act in the outer world. Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to look at antisocial personality disorder, what it means to break the rules. Then we'll explore borderline personality disorder, that storm within. We'll also put histrionic and narcissistic disorders side by side to understand their shared need for attention. And most importantly, we'll end by talking about how to move from a place of judgment to one of real understanding. First up, antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD. This one is really defined by a pretty fundamental disregard for other people's rights. But the most important thing to get about ASPD is that it doesn't just pop up out of thin air when someone becomes an adult. Actually, you can't even get a diagnosis of ASPD unless you're 18 or older. And this is the key part. It requires a history of something called conduct disorder during childhood or the teen years. Conduct disorder is this persistent pattern of aggression, lying, or seriously breaking rules, and it really sets the stage for the adult diagnosis. So the features of ASPD are pretty stark. We're talking about someone who consistently ignores social rules, acts impulsively, is often deceitful, and maybe most critically, shows a real lack of empathy or remorse for what they do. And this all tends to show up as really high-risk behavior, without much thought for their own safety or anyone else's. This quote from someone with the disorder just says it all. I wasn't wearing the consequences, I really didn't care, it wasn't looking that far ahead. It shows you it's not just about ignoring the consequences, it's almost like a total disconnect from them in the moment, which of course leads to the big question, what is going on in the brain? Well, researchers have a couple of leading theories. First is the under-arousal hypothesis. The idea here is that their brains are running on a kind of chronically low setting. They're just bored, and that boredom drives them to seek out really intense, high-risk situations just to feel something. Then you have the fearlessness hypothesis. This one suggests that their internal alarm bell for danger just doesn't ring. They don't respond to danger cues the way most people do, which makes it almost impossible to learn from punishment. All right, let's shift gears now to borderline personality disorder, or BPD. If ASPD is all about external actions and breaking rules, BPD is defined by an incredibly intense internal storm. It's all about emotional dysregulation. There's this really powerful analogy to describe the emotional experience of BPD. Think about a rabbit escaping a cage. It's startling, but you can probably catch it and calm things down. Now imagine a tiger gets out of its cage. That's BPD. The emotion is so huge, so overwhelming, that just trying to get it back to a manageable level is a monumental struggle. And that incredible emotional intensity is what fuels the core features. We're talking about really unstable moods in relationships, a deep, intense fear of being abandoned, and acting impulsively. It can also lead to a really poor or shifting sense of who you are, using self-harm to cope with that immense internal pain, and something called splitting. That's when you see people in black and white terms. They're either all good, perfect angels, or they're all bad, terrible villains. There's no gray area. So what's happening on a biological level? Well, you can think of it in two parts. Part one is the brain's alarm system, the amygdala. For people with BPD, the amygdala is often overactive. It's kind of like having a smoke detector that doesn't just go off for a 5-alarm fire. It goes off when you burn a piece of toast. And here's part two, which completes the picture. The brain's braking system, the prefrontal cortex that handles reasoning and helps you calm down, is often underactive. So think about that combo. You've got a super sensitive alarm that's always going off, and the brakes designed to slow things down don't really work. It's a recipe for overwhelming emotion. Okay, our next two disorders, histrionic personality disorder, or HPD, and narcissistic personality disorder, NPD, often get talked about together. And that's because they both revolve around this deep, driving need for attention. But, and this is a huge but, the kind of attention they're looking for is completely different. And here it is, the single most important difference. Someone with histrionic traits needs to be the center of attention, period. It doesn't matter if it's good attention or bad attention, as long as all eyes are on them. But someone with narcissistic traits needs positive attention. They need admiration, and that makes them incredibly sensitive to any kind of criticism. Let's break this down a bit more, because their motivations are just worlds apart. For HPD, the main drive is to be in the spotlight. Their emotions might seem really dramatic, but can often come across as shallow. With NPD, the drive is totally different. It's to be admired, to be seen as superior. This is the whole game. It usually leads to a real lack of empathy, seeing other people as tools to get more status, and when they're criticized, they often react with rage or just blame everyone else. So where does this come from? One major theory about NPD goes back to childhood and something called a failure of empathic mirroring. Just imagine a little kid who runs to their parent, so proud of a drawing they made. But instead of the parent saying, "Wow, that's amazing, tell me about it," they ignore it, or worse, make it about themselves. When that happens over and over, the child never gets to build a solid internal sense of their own worth. All right, let's pull all this together in our final section. Because really, understanding these disorders isn't about slapping labels on people. It's about recognizing these are patterns born from real suffering. And that brings us to the really critical topics of what causes this, and more importantly, how it can be treated. For borderline personality disorder, there's a remarkably effective treatment called dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. The core idea is the dialectic, which sounds complicated, but it's really just about holding two things that seem like opposites as true at the same time. In DBT, that means fully accepting yourself exactly as you are in this moment, while at the same time knowing you need to change and working on it. The whole goal is to learn to handle distress and eventually to trust yourself again. Now, when we look at the treatment outlook, we see this really stark but very important contrast. For adults with antisocial personality disorder, the prognosis is unfortunately pretty poor. Treatment is very, very difficult. That's why prevention is everything, focusing on kids who are at risk and intervening early. But for borderline personality disorder, the story is so much more hopeful. With things like DBT and a focus on skills training, the prognosis can be really good. It offers a real path to a much better quality of life. And that really brings us to our final thought here. These disorders are incredibly complex. They're a tangled mix of biology and life experience. But by looking past just the surface behaviors and trying to understand the pain underneath, the brain science, the life story, we do a lot more than just learn some facts. We start to chip away at stigma and replace it with empathy. So the question I want to leave you with is this: how does understanding the why behind a behavior truly change how we see the world and all the people in it?